Hi, and welcome to the OT is In, the podcast where we merge the worlds of education and occupational therapy to empower families like yours. I'm Sarah Collins, your host, an occupational therapist and a homeschooling parent. I've experienced occupational therapy by supporting families for over 15 years, but also through seeking out support of my own children. So I'm right here in the trenches with you. Though there is not one way to educate your child, there is a lot to consider when individualizing an education. And the goal of this podcast is to explain some of the why behind what an occupational therapist is thinking so you can apply it to your own family. Especially with my three favorite topics: executive functioning, handwriting, and sensory processing. Each episode will be packed with practical tips, expert interviews, and real-life stories aimed at helping you to create a supportive learning environment for your child. So, grab your headphones and get ready to dive in of the collision of education and occupational therapy. I'm Sarah Collins from Homeschool OT, and I'm thrilled to have you with me on this journey of discovery. Hey, and welcome back to another captivating episode of the OT is In podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Collins, and today we are absolutely thrilled to have with us the incredible Leslie Martino, a homeschooling mom, educator, and author of the inspiring book, The Joy of Slow. Leslie and I talk about the importance of slowing down and learning, finding balance, and igniting a love for education. In essence, we're talking about secretly the executive functioning skills of prioritization and planning and time management. Leslie shares invaluable insights about turning challenges into meaningful learning experiences, fostering resilience, and embracing expansive time. So whether you're a seasoned homeschooler or new to the journey, this episode is packed with wisdom and practical tips that will enrich your educational approach. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this enriching dialogue with Leslie Martino right here on the OT is In. Hey there, listeners. It's Sarah Collins, the host of the OT is In. Thank you for being here. And guys, the new year is here. Can you even believe it? It's the perfect time to pause and reevaluate your homeschooling rhythms, build on what's already working, but let's be real. Sometimes homeschooling can feel overwhelming, especially when it comes to meeting each child's unique needs. That's where Homeschool OT comes in. So with over 16 years of experience as an occupational therapist and 7 years here as a homeschool mom, I get it, and I've been there. I've had times where our homeschool felt peaceful and that it was supporting and serving our children well. I've also had times where I knew I needed help and to build my team. I've said it before, and I will continue to say it repeatedly: homeschooling is not alone schooling. So if you need help to figure out what that means, I have two resources for you. First, Why Choose OT is a downloadable guide designed to help families understand the role of occupational therapy in homeschooling. It answers key questions, explains how OT can address challenges like sensory processing and handwriting, and helps you decide if OT is right for your family. And the second, the OT Service Provider Guide, offers practical advice for finding and collaborating with an OT who aligns with your homeschooling needs. So this guide simplifies the process of identifying providers who understand goals and can deliver the right support. Both resources empower parents to create tailored, effective learning experiences for your children. So explore these tools and start transforming your homeschool today. You can find those at homeschoolot.com/shop or find them here linked in the show notes. Thank you for being here. Now let's get on with the show. Hey, and welcome back to the OT is In podcast. Today I have Leslie Martino here who, guys, I'm a little fangirling, I'm not gonna lie. I saw Leslie for the first time a couple years ago at Wild and Free, and then have been following your work and reading your book and all these great things. And guys, I didn't tell Leslie this before because I wanted to say it on the podcast first, but about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was in a car accident, and I was listening to your book as we were going, and it was I got T-boned in an intersection, and it was bad. But the interesting thing, I know, look at your face, like you're in the car with me. when the ambulance came up afterwards and they were like, Sarah, can you get out or do we need to cut you out? Like it was bad. Can I cut you out or can you climb out? I could. I climbed over, I got out, I was in the ambulance and he was taking all my vital signs. He was like, your vital signs are remarkably low and calm. I was like, I was just
Wow.
listening to the
Oh,
most calming book. It was so great.
oh my goodness.
But you were
Wow.
in during that time, and it's just such a wonderful, calming presence. So thank you for being there.
I'm I'm at a loss for words. That's wow. What
Yeah,
a
it
great
was.
I feel oh my God, I feel so many emotions. What a great compliment and thank you, but I'm so sorry first that you had to go through all of that.
Yes, obviously not an ideal situation, but it's
Right.
some amazing, beautiful things. The car itself
Oh.
was gone, but the person who I was in the accident with, she was nervous at the beginning to come up to
Mm,
the car,
mm,
rightfully so. You don't know what you're going to see, but you also don't know
mm.
how people are going to react. But just such a beautiful experience after we talked, we prayed together. Yeah, like
Wow.
just good things. And I ended up with a bruise on my hip and a slight concussion, and that's it. So
Oh,
it's just,
amazing.
yeah. But you were there and you didn't even know you were there. And
Oh,
who knows how
I'm
different it
glad
would
I
have
was able to
been.
I'm glad I was able to provide that for you in that moment. Oh my goodness. Wow.
So the joy of slow, right? And we
Yes.
actually saw that happen there. But
Mm.
now I've told that whole story. Leslie, can you introduce yourself for those who haven't been hanging out in the car with you?
Yes, sure. So my name is Leslie Martino, and I am a homeschooling mom of four. We've homeschooled since the very beginning. I also talk and write a lot about education and learning. I have been an educator all my life, and I feel like homeschooling is another avenue that we've been able to explore that. But the book that I most recently came out with is The Joy of Slow, and it's on restoring balance and wonder to homeschool learning.
Which is so beautiful. It's one of the books now that I'm recommending to new homeschool moms
Mm.
right away. We've been homeschooling for 9 years, and it was still a really beautiful reminder to me of so
Mhm.
many of the reasons why we homeschool. And
Wow.
then here at Homeschool OT, I work with so many families who are struggling with executive functioning or don't necessarily know that is the struggle, but are struggling in general. And so we're trying to figure out the why there.
Yeah.
And some of the most beautiful pieces that I found in your book had to do with that prioritization for
Yeah.
moms and homeschool parents, and also for kids, like teaching how to
Mhm.
prioritize. So, just to get started with that, there's several quotes in there. In fact, I told you I was listening audiobook wise, but I usually love to interact with my books and highlight and that type of thing. So these are all written down in my commonplace journal.
I
I've
love
really
that.
done that.
I
So one of them is, I believe, one of the ways that you started your chapter. And so it says, our goal in learning is not to get more and more comfortable with rigor and difficulty, but to become more and more prepared for the experience of challenge.
mm,
Preparation and rigor are not one and the same. And that's actually quoted from Julie Bogart, but I believe,
yes.
probably. So
Mhm.
why did that stand out to you and how does that impact
Yeah.
your homeschooling?
Yeah, so that quote in and of itself, that really stood out to me too. And I even explain in the book that when I was listening to Julie Bogart's Brave Writer podcast and I heard her say that, I immediately pulled the car over so that I could write it down because I just felt like a weight drop through me. And I was like, that's it right there. And in the episode, she's talking about how parents assume that rigor is the better version of
Yeah.
learning. Like we assume that because something is rigorous or because it's difficult, that kids must be learning more and they must
Mhm.
be doing more. And you look at all these schools that are label their curriculum rigorous curriculum, like that's like the gold standard. Exactly. And she says that we, as parents, as adults, we have this tendency to prioritize difficulty and to prioritize discipline and meeting these prescribed markers for achievement over developing in ways that are more holistic
Yeah.
and more meaningful or specific to the individual child. And difficulty, I think, on its own does it does very little. It proves very little. But an education where we are preparing our children for the challenges they'll be sure to encounter in life and within their work is where the real work really does begin. And one of the things that that episode that I'm referring to, that podcast episode, was also talking about was the idea of relaxed alertness in learning, and that being the ideal learning state. And I think that when we are more concerned with that ideal state than making things disciplined and rigorous, that we are actually giving a more holistic education, because we can be in a relaxed state when learning is meaningful to us. We can be in a relaxed state when we see ourselves as capable learners. So, what does it take for our children to see themselves as capable? How can they be flexible and persistent even when things are hard, even when things are difficult, but the work is meaningful to them? So, how do you gracefully confront challenges? Because that's part of the process of it all. And I think it involves critical thinking, and I think it involves reading widely and pursuing things that you're truly passionate about, and being reflective about your work and about your learning experiences, and sometimes doing work that's difficult, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's all built into a slow approach, because I think people sometimes think that they hear the word slowing down and they think, okay, Leslie must mean take it easy. Take
Yeah,
it
it's
easy.
gonna be
It's going to be
yeah.
so easy. And I think that there's rest and freedom and space for things like creativity and spontaneity are really important. But when I say slow, I'm also hoping to capture what I describe also in the book as a paradox of balance. Things like leisure and hard work and success and failure, they can all exist together and they can all go hand in hand. It's not like mindless productivity,
Right.
but it's intentionally slowing down to appreciate all the ways that real learning actually does happen.
I think that is especially the balance when you're talking about the success and failure can happen simultaneously.
Mhm.
When we were going through, or I was going through OT school and we were preparing to get started with our first interview process and things like that, one of the professors said, your biggest strength is always going to be your biggest weakness. And so you need to think about that as you're going in to answer questions. And you're thinking, wow, I really see big picture. It's such a beautiful part of my strength and who I am. But because of that, sometimes details are hard. Being open with those
Yes.
are so important. But and what you're saying here is you can notice those when you're going slower and not be afraid of them.
Exactly. Because I feel like that's where the learning is, that's where the magic happens, right? Because learning extends beyond reading, writing, and math,
Yes.
or all the conventional subjects that we think and encapsulate, oh, this is school or this is learning. And I think that finding ways to meaningfully connect to those conventional subjects is important, but so also important is pursuing interests and critical thinking and ethical reflection. Why? Because that's where you can work out the strengths alongside the struggles, and it's still meaningful to you. We need real, not the ones that we contrive, like on a test. We need real learning scenarios of succeeding at a project, failing along the way. Failure in traditional school settings is defined as the penalty for poor performance. Excuse me, it's a tongue twister. But I think in real learning scenarios, like what you're saying, failure is the feedback that we need to improve. It's the feedback that we need to grow, to change, to get better. Like we need it all. So it's not about making things so difficult that most of the people who are doing it are going to fail. That's the measure. It's no,
Yeah.
that's not beneficial.
Right. And especially when we're thinking about in terms of rigor, oftentimes that failure in rigor is how we weed people out. You're not going to make it, right? But that's not what we want.
Exactly. And don't you want the skills? I always think about that, the ability, the more and more I've been thinking about this a lot lately, but just the more and more able you are, or the ability, a growing, increasing ability to be resilient. I feel like that's one of life's biggest,
Hardships.
and it's a really important skill, like in
Yeah.
so many different ways. And I've been looking at my children and looking at the things that they go through individually, and I want them to learn to be resilient. Like, how do you handle challenges? It's not like you meet a challenge. Ah, yes, fail. Gotcha. No, like
Boom.
that's That's not what I want to be as a parent or an educator. I want you to learn how to be resilient through those challenges. And what skills do you actually need to be able to do that? And how much time do those skills actually take to build?
Yeah.
Let's be real about that. It's not a week. We need time to develop those things in real scenarios that matter to the child and that matter to us as well. But the child has to connect personally to those sorts of experiences.
Absolutely. In OT speak, we say occupation as a means and occupation as an end, right? If we're thinking, so an occupation is defined as how you occupy your time. So we want to be using some of these occupations to help to build the grit or to build that persistence. So things like our everyday activities, every single task that we do, you have to get started and you persevere to the end. But then with the ultimate goal being other ways that you can occupy your time, that you're building these skills to get to that occupation as an end. And oftentimes, those occupations that we're building towards require even more of that grit and persistence and the time management that you were speaking of. So many of these skills that we're building along the way to get to that ultimate end.
I really like that. I like those descriptions.
The other quote that I loved a little bit later on in the book, but you said, no matter how many times I laugh or dance, my kids respond better when I initiate the fun. When time is seen as expansive rather than something that we're present for, we're more apt to lead with playfulness. It sets the stage for opportunities for both parent and child to engage each other with honesty and acceptance in a low pressure environment. Listen, I feel like there's so much to unpack with this one. But first, talk about time as expansive, because I think that's like a hard thing for us to imagine.
Yeah, because I think reason being, we are so concerned with trying to pack in
Yeah.
so much to such short time spans that we don't even have the ability to see time with any sort of long range perspective or expanse. And that's part of what I mean. A lot of times we think about the time that we have and we only associate it with productivity, like the time to do.
How much did I
But
get done today?
exactly. But time really includes so many more things. It even includes time to rest. It includes time for leisure, right? It includes time for passion. It includes time for thinking, time for noticing. There's a lot that goes into our time. And even if you want to talk about just learning, like time to process, time to think, time to react, time to experiment. And I think sometimes when we are not willing to see time that way and play around with what that could possibly mean for our parenting or for our homeschooling or for learning experiences, then I think it's really going to seriously limit what we're actually doing at home with our children day to day. Because time, if we can see time as more expansive than what we often give it credit for, then that means that we are going to start appreciating that space for those kinds of things to happen. If you just take like noticing, for example, sometimes I like to think about learning sometimes by relating it to learning things outside of the conventional subjects, right? Because I think we see more about learning experiences when we disassociate for a moment. So if you take learning to draw, what are the things that go into that? So you are learning different skills, which really have to do with visual perception and seeing and the
Oh,
ability
you're
to
speaking
see.
my language here.
Right, right. And translate those things through an experience through the eyes, the brain
Yeah.
into the hand. The time to learn something, just because you scribble an image, look at an image of a horse and you scribble it on paper. I learned how to draw a horse. What are you saying that so then if you think about, okay, time, okay, I'm practicing seeing and noticing. So I have to give myself time to even see this image
The
correctly or
details. Yeah.
see details, to observe it many times, to see it in different contexts. It's not just a one day wham bam, you're finished kind of
Yeah.
thing. And I just think you if you do that with different scenarios, you can see the sort of time that I'm saying that we need to be a little bit more willing to give over to these learning experiences. But what I'm also saying is that it means we have to be concerned with doing less, because those things take time, right? So we can't cram our activity
Everything in.
time and cram everything in. But if we go deeper and do less things better, we're actually doing more in the long run.
Yeah,
We're actually learning deeper lessons and doing better work. And we are so worried and concerned about the learning gaps. And if you don't cover all these things, but they're not learning all those things anyway,
right.
perusing something doesn't mean it's truly embodied or truly learned. And we all have learning gaps, but can we talk about how we're interpreting those gaps? So, anyway.
Are you a homeschooling parent who's reevaluating your curriculum this January? Well, it is the perfect time to take a fresh look at what's working and what's not. So, if math has been a challenge in your home, CTC Math might be the game changer that you're looking for. CTC Math is a comprehensive online math program designed with homeschool families in mind. So, whether your kids are struggling with tricky concepts or flying through their lessons, CTC Math offers flexibility, self-paced lessons, and clear, easy to understand explanations that meet your family's unique needs. With CTC Math, parents can step back and focus on other parts of homeschooling while their children gain confidence and mastery in math. Plus, the family membership makes it affordable for households with multiple students. It's January. Don't let another semester go by without the right tools. So visit ctcmath.com to start your free trial today and make this the year that your family loves math. Now, back to the show.
Yeah.
I think this is such a fantastic concept. I will tell you, there are so many parents that I talk to that are so, yes, worried about their learning gaps, but they're so fearful because they don't want their children to miss out on an opportunity because of something that they weren't taught, right? This is almost the number one, pretty high up there when I'm speaking to parents about their concerns of homeschooling. What if I don't do enough and then they miss out on something that they want to do? So then when we go in and say, well, do less and make time, they're like, what?
Yeah, it's hard. It's a
Yeah.
hard concept to really, it feels scary
Yeah.
because it feels like you're less in control. And we equate our control of the learning moments with the things that we know we are teaching, but then we therefore equate what is taught with what is learned. And even in school settings, I can tell you that's not how it is. I'm a former teacher, classroom educator. That is not, it's not that we assume that's where it's happening. It's not. That's not the best way. That's not what real learning entails. We at home, we have an opportunity to do so much more. To see learning is so much more. And to give kids the kinds of skills that we all are saying we really want them to have.
Right.
And it takes time to actually build those things.
I love how you mentioned too the time for reflection, and you talked about that some through actually all throughout today. And again, with executive functioning, a lot of times what we talk about there is metacognition, right? So learning how
Yes.
you learn, being able to do that
Mhm.
self-evaluation and
Mhm.
also evaluating together with you
Mhm.
and your child. And we need extra time to be able to
Mhm.
do that.
Yeah.
And then how much that carries over. Because if you know how you learn, if I
Mhm.
gave you a big giant gap in your education of, let's say, we never covered calculus or whatever, and now
Mhm.
all of a
Mhm.
sudden you need that in your job, you can figure
Mhm.
out how you learn it.
Exactly.
So, what
Yes.
are some ways that you have practiced the kind of that self-evaluation or that talking through those things with your children?
I am really big on it. And a lot of it is through conversation. I love to talk about you're thinking about your thinking,
Yeah.
metacognition. I love to hear you talk through your process on how you got to something. And so those kinds of things develop in really small ways. You can take a 5-year old and ask, "Oh, how did you make this? Why did you decide to put this here? How did you come up with your idea?" It's those are all conversations that reveal a child's thoughts about their work. And those sorts of skills just build and they get older. You can start doing those kinds of reflections and documenting that. And the child can do that, but you can certainly write down the child's words. In the book, I describe even in writing my I gave an example of my daughter's self-reflection that she did of her own writing piece, where she was just, or not even a writing piece, but her own development as a writer of fiction. And hearing a child talk about what it is that they've gained from these writing experiences, what it is that they feel are learning, are very important, because they are sometimes, they're telling you how they want their work to be read. They're showing how they feel like they've developed. The child's voice is a very important part of this learning picture. And sometimes we think, well, I was just teaching opening hook and paragraph structure. And it's like the child's, that's great, but that's not what I was working
Yeah,
on as a
no.
writer. And but the things that they say and that they reveal are amazing. And if you ask a writer who's out there publishing books, they're working on the same things, and the child has caught that. And so I feel like you have that sort of reflection is important to do with children. You can do it with children of all ages, and you can do it in ways that are developmentally appropriate, and it can build as the child gets older.
And I think we can do this through, just as you were saying, sometimes the learning is not happening within the academics. We can do that with, you're climbing a tree and you say,
Yes.
what's next? And they have to look around and say
Yes.
where to go. And is that going to be
Mm-hmm.
safe? Or
Mm-hmm.
once they get down, how did that go?
Yes.
This metacognition everywhere then can build
Mm-hmm.
into those academics, and they're used to you asking those questions, and it's not.
Yes. And then sometimes when you're in those conversations and you're asking those questions, they recognize themselves where the holes are, where they haven't planned appropriately, and where they might need to go back and alter their plan a little bit. And that's so much more powerful than you saying, that's not going to work. You
Yeah.
have to go make a plan and do A, B, C.
And
No.
this is the formula for the plan.
Exactly. It's, oh, you're building a tree house. How are you going to blah, 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 blah. Oh, I didn't think about that. Oh, what will happen if you continue to build it? Do you think, but do you think you might need to go? Those kinds of, those we can, so tree house building, it's like anything can lend itself to that kind of thinking conversation.
That all requires time, right? And so if we're talking
Yes.
about this expansive time, if we can just, even at the end of the day, look back and be like, hey, here are ways that my child was quote unquote educated today or
Mm-hmm.
schooled today as they're
Yes.
building their treehouse. And then we could talk about
Mm-hmm.
this, or we wrote about it, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
sky is the limit. Oh, I just love
Yeah.
this so much. Leslie, thank you so much for being here. And can you tell everyone where they can find you and find your work?
Sure. Yes, Sarah, thank you so much for having me on. So I am online at lesliemartino.com. And for social media, I am most active on Instagram. My handle is Leslie M. Martino. You have to stick my middle initial in there. And the book is available wherever books are sold.
And on audiobook, and then you can listen to this fantastic calming voice the entire.
Oh, that was so fun. What an experience for me to be able to record that audiobook. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of The OT is In. If you're ready to dive deeper into how occupational therapy can support your homeschool journey, don't forget to check out the free downloadable resources at homeschoolot.com. You'll find Why Choose OT, a helpful guide that breaks down how OT can make a difference for your child, and guide to different service providers, so you can find the support that fits your family's unique needs. So head over to homeschoolot.com to grab those resources and take the next step in empowering your homeschool experience. Until next time, keep growing, learning, and creating a homeschool that works for your family. I'll see you next week.